Thank you so much, Dani, for coming onto the podcast. Really, really happy to have a chat with you about your experience in social work so far and a little bit about your work.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure.
It's exciting.
Yeah, I wanted to ask firstly when you started as a social worker and what brought you to the profession.
I started in 2000. So sometimes I have to do the maths in my head. I'm like, oh, okay, yes, it's literally over 20 years now.
Yeah.
Um, and what brought me to social work? What brings us to, yeah, I think a funny path for me, but one that ultimately fit. I was one of those people who I wanted to be a therapist. When you're a teenager, so that's probably a bad idea. Nobody wants to talk to a person that young about all their
Uh-huh.
things. And I did the thing that most people do is getting to psychology 101, Bachelor of Arts. Did that for a year and then had a small career crisis because it wasn't a good fit, you know. It
Yeah.
was 200 people in a room, couldn't connect with, fellow students. So I did a bit of an about face and wanted something that was going to be adaptable. I wanted a career that meant when I came out of university, I could actually get a job. That was
Mm-hmm.
important to me.
Crazy.
Yes, I know how radical. So looking at a few different options, landed on, I think I was down to rehab counselling or social work. And when diving into how many choices do we get, social work was the most flexible and the most diverse, because who really knows what you want to do when you're going to grow up?
I
So,
know. So much pressure.
so much pressure. That's another conversation, really, making us make big life decisions, age 17 or
Yeah.
18.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a good fit. It was a good fit. It was a nice fit of relatable, meaningful content. It ticked the passion box, but it really gave a lot of scope, which I really liked, and I've utilised a lot in my career. The scope for how
Mm-hmm.
many different things can we do?
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah, absolutely.
And you've had quite a varied degree, so quite a varied amount of experience in different places. What has led to this
Yeah.
point in your career where you are now?
Oh, so many things. I guess the short version is getting to a point where I felt like I was probably a bit of a painful employee, and it was maybe time to step out on my own.
Yeah.
Found myself, I guess, towards the end of the career before I launched the business, bouncing through a number of really high level jobs quite quickly,
Mm.
and feeling like just because you can get the job and nail the interview doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit job for you.
Yeah.
And trying to find a role that had enough diversity in it, because I get bored pretty easily. So if you have me doing
Mm-hmm.
the same thing all day, every day, I'm not going to cope very well. So I guess that through a number of different experiences in management roles, state-based leadership roles, and therapeutic roles, I kind of decided to roll them all in together and start a business where I could do all the things.
Mm-hmm. And when you say high level, as you said, those are management leadership roles, which my understanding is they kind of require you to be sort of like a specialist in one area or another. So if you're looking for diversity, it's really difficult to find if you're at that high level.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something you want to strive for. You think I have the experience, I want to go for this high level job, but really difficult if that's what you're looking for. So I guess, I mean, what the suggestion would be then try to find something you're passionate about, even if it's not the highest paying thing. Because I mean, we all know we didn't get into social work for the money.
We didn't, but sometimes life takes you to a place where you need it, or you're looking for that satisfaction, and
Mm,
you're looking for a role that's meaningful, but then you can kind of have a voice at a higher level, I
Mhm.
guess. So for me, leadership roles, which I did for a big chunk in the sort of middle of my career, um, was about being able to connect to a team and build a team of, you know, I like the definition of leadership of, a group of people who are all facing in the same direction,
Mm.
moving towards a common goal. We're sort of aligned in the vision and in the passion.
Yeah.
And so I had some really great experiences early on, in a small NGO that grew. I was there for 12 years. And when I started, there were 8 people. And when I left, there was 60. And
Wow.
being able to be part of that
Growth.
process,
Yeah.
growth, yeah, and sort of become part of the furniture, but also the opportunity to kind of develop new programs and
Mm.
lead change in the sector. At that time was in case management and complex case management and aged and disability services. Um, it so it was an opportunity to create more effective services,
Mhm.
for our clients. It wasn't about being in charge of all things. It was just about that next level to sort of advocate, uh, to funding bodies and to government about what works. What
Yeah.
we'd learnt that had worked. Um, and I guess I found that sometimes then later in my career, stepping back into like some roles in really big NGOs, that was a very different experience than being kind of grassroots. So I
Mhm.
think that was an interesting learning experience in trying to leverage change.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah, the
It sounds
same.
like working in that small organization, there's quite a lot of opportunity to leave a legacy and to leave that mark on an organization for the better. Were there, can you give an example of a type of project or a policy that perhaps was changed while you're there?
Um, I think one of the things that stayed with me the most was it was in the days pre NDIS, pre aged care sector, gateways, and all of the federal changes to when aged and disability services was home and community care. And I was fortunate to come into that sector at a time where case management was really valued
Mm.
as, not an expensive service that we didn't need, but a service that actually allowed us to be person centered in our approach to working with clients and create meaningful outcomes that meant people increase their quality of life.
Yeah.
So at that time, having the opportunity to participate in statewide conferences and talk about you know alterations to the way, projects operated. Anybody who's been around for as long as I have might have heard of the Community Options Program, which was fundamental at its time, and it actually created a model that was duplicated across the community sector, in case management. And I was lucky enough to be a part of that at the time and got to run pilots like the first compacts pilot,
Mhm.
in New South Wales, which was that exact model we'd developed in community options in a 6-week intensive block. So
Yeah.
being able to lead, the pilot and then the rollout of that, in northern Sydney that went statewide was satisfying because we were proving that it worked,
Mm.
and it reduced readmission and we could connect people to services. Um, so I was really proud of that time. Uh, Leaving a legacy, sometimes then, major reform means that things change,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure that some of the meaning and some of the effectiveness that was created back then, is still around now. It's
Right.
it's time and
Mhm.
place. I was lucky.
Different priorities.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many changes with funding as the years progress as well.
Mm.
Did you find teaching at TAFE gave you an opportunity to foster that passion within a younger generation of people wanting to study this sort of work as well?
Yeah, I did actually. It was interesting teaching at TAFE, kind of, and throwing myself into a training role with students from like 16 to in their 60s
Mm-hmm.
was it was really interesting to be able to have a lot of practical real life examples of what worked rather than it just being theory. So I think that was the thing that was I guess a point of difference of training in that time that was I think it was a great way to kind of round out that part of my career
Yeah.
moving and the improv skills that you need to develop as a trainer.
Yeah.
It's like if I ever do get to be a stand-up comedian, that goal, you go, oh, maybe one day I could do that. It's like the
Yeah.
training part meant that you had to kind of improvise at the time, or the tech.
Constantly on your feet.
That's it. That's it. So yeah, it was interesting. I don't think I'm born to be a day in day out trainer.
Yeah.
But it was a good experience at the time. Yeah, for
Do
sure.
you think that context would have been different if you were in a university teaching
I'm sure there
from a
would.
practical perspective?
Mm, probably. Probably. I wasn't drawn towards academia
Mm.
as such. I don't know whether I would have been a good fit. I did do some work with several universities, kind of consulting as like external supervision, which was good because you could be the like radical on the outside, but I was the person on the inside. I think
Yeah.
that suited me better. Yeah.
Amazing. What's your current role then? You've alluded to being your own boss. What does a typical day look like? I can't imagine there would be one, but even
Mm.
like today, walk me through what your normal role is
Mm.
like.
At the moment, I guess my official role is CEO, founder, clinical social worker, therapeutic ADHD coach, chief operating officer, head of HR, um,
You need a larger business
finance.
card, I think.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. Supervisor, line manager. Yeah, when you launch yourself into a startup, there are a lot of hats. So I'm doing a bit of all of those things every day,
Mhm.
and it's at the point of trying to get the balance right for growth. So how much do you outsource? How much do you do yourself?
Yeah.
So I guess I sort of split my time at the moment between client work. We offer ADHD assessment for adults, and I do a fair bit of therapeutic coaching with clients, which is a service model that I developed. It's a hybrid counselling, practical coaching approach that supports our clients with the multi-divergent aspects really of being an adult who's lived a life not knowing they had ADHD,
Mm.
which is 98% of our cohort. So that's been, that's ever evolving at the moment. So it's doing that and then trying to build, a quality framework for an organisation that's growing and managing and supporting the team of 6. I've got 6 staff that work with
Yeah.
me at the moment.
So constantly responding to changes, I can imagine, in whatever it is, guidelines, legislation, whatever the criteria are, every time there's a change in that, but also what works and what doesn't, and how can you then kind of feel brave enough to scrap a whole bunch of stuff that previously you were working really hard on.
I don't know if I've scrapped it. I think I evolve it. I evolve it
Uh-huh.
as I'm going. And the interesting thing about the Divergent Edge is that we're operating like nationally across Australia. So there are different, say, prescribing laws in different states, and so the
Mm,
doctors that we work with have, you know, different restrictions on them, and it's very hard to get across everything across all of the states in terms of risk management or child protection legislation, which is different. So it's interesting. I don't get bored, and that's been my
mm,
biggest problem with most of
with the high level roles, yeah.
the high level roles, and even if all I was doing was client work all day, for me, I'm best if I'm adapting and switching in the course of the day
Hmm.
because that gets the best out of me. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's always lots to
You
do.
Yeah, you mentioned quite a lot of the people that receive that diagnosis are adults. What is the typical age for diagnosis for ADHD?
There is a lot of women at the moment um, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that
Wow.
are coming through who have had often they've had the experience of misdiagnosis, anxiety, depression, um, sometimes bipolar, um, sometimes borderline personality, trauma history, had all of these things, and none of them have ever
Mm.
really quite. They're gone, just doesn't fit. Am I anxious? Okay, maybe I'm anxious, um, and and a lot of our clients, learn about that you can have ADHD as an adult and start to go, oh, that sounds a little bit like me. What was that meme I saw, or that Facebook post, or one of my friends just got diagnosed, which happens a lot.
Mm.
And so they start exploring it, and they're like, okay, wow, this sounds a bit like my life. So often successful professionals um, who are not managing as well as they feel they should come and see us and help unpack actually what is going on that's been missed
Yeah.
all these years. So that's pretty much our typical client. We do work with younger people from sort of late teens. I think some of our oldest clients are in their 60s at
Mm.
the moment through the spectrum, couples and family work in different aspects. Yeah, so it's very satisfying work. It's very validating for our clients because it can do your head in a little bit to go,
Hmm.
this is a big part of the way my brain is wired that I never really knew.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of people, once they receive that diagnosis, are so relieved because finally they think, this is me. I do fit into this category. Whereas I felt like
Mm,
I was just an anomaly before.
absolutely. There was always just something not quite right, or some sort of residual effect on self-esteem or boundary setting, or just not feeling like you're as smart as everyone else. Something there. And the biggest feedback that we get from our clients is that, thank you, that's just been so validating. It's
Hmm.
just so validating of my experience of being in the world, and that there isn't something wrong with me.
Yeah.
um, and that's a huge privilege, I think, to be able to share that
Yeah.
with our clients. It makes a big difference. Yeah.
Are you able to briefly explain what the diagnostic criteria are?
Oh, well, I could, but I would probably critique it at the same time. Um,
That's okay.
yeah,
That's the social work way, right?
I admit, I'm like, oh, I'm also working for change. So it's interesting. The diagnostic criteria for adults is still largely based on what's used for children. So
Mm.
there are some fundamental aspects of the impact of ADHD in adults that are at the moment left out of the DSM-5 criteria.
And is that just because we're picking it up later, so we don't have that experience?
It used to be in there and some bright spark took it out.
Mm.
Um, and so I think sometimes things like that lend itself to a lot of myths about ADHD.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people, like smart people, feeling like that's not going to be a fit for them.
Hmm.
Um, so the diagnostic criteria is a lot around executive function deficits,
Hmm.
and to a very minor extent, challenges with emotional regulation.
Yeah.
So that's things like frustration tolerance or irritability or impulsivity. Executive function deficits such as, trouble getting organized, trouble finishing off tasks if once the interesting bit has been done.
Mm.
Um, keeping on task and on time if you're doing something that you find boring, and making simple mistakes. Um, keeping track of appointments, keeping and keeping I guess there's a lot of focus on those kind of attributes that fit um, clients who might have inattentive features and combined type features. Some of the more pervasive and kind of complex diagnostic criteria around restlessness and
Mm-hmm.
hyperactivity and how that presents in adults. So, if we think about the spectrum of ADHD as it stands in Australia, we have firstly, there is no ADD. There is no diagnosis that is ADD. It is all ADHD with different subtypes. So
Mm.
we've got ADHD predominantly inattentive, we've
Mm-hmm.
got ADHD combined type, and then ADHD predominantly hyperactive.
And
So
is one more severe or considered more severe than the other?
no, no,
They're just on a
it's just
range.
yes, because if you've met one person with ADHD, you could meet somebody with a very different presentation who operates completely differently and
Mm.
doesn't fit the stereotype.
Yeah.
So that's why it's one of the really important things to understand about the difference in those presentations. That as a woman in my 40s with 3 children running a business with hyperactive type, I'm not bouncing on the couch and unable to sit still
Mm-hmm.
or read a book um, because people think hyperactive type, small 6-year-old boy can't sit still in class. Oh, that's not me, so I can't be that.
Yeah.
You know, um, inattentive type is traditionally known as kind of the if you're looking at children a bit off with the pixies. We're just like quite not missing stuff and and therefore getting behind in learning because just trouble focusing on the content. Okay, so much of this is about our brain chemistry and having an interest based brain, which means if we're
Yeah.
interested, we're really, really interested, right? And if we're not, well, we're not really, and it can be a little bit hard to focus and get the best out of the task or activity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it looks really different depending on your presentation. Combined type is, as you would expect, a bit of both.
Mm.
Sometimes there's a push pull there.
Yeah.
And a lot of internalized stress and frustration of knowing all of the things that need to get done and having an inability to enact and execute and complete those
Mm.
things.
So it's not necessarily a lack of motivation, but a lack of understanding of how to get to that, how to work out the steps.
How to start and the way when your dopamine levels in your brain aren't functioning in the way that they should, initiation of tasks is really difficult.
Mm.
Motivation of tasks to commence a task, even if it's one you really, really need to do, can be very, very challenging.
Yeah.
So, um, a lot of adults with ADHD have had the experience where because planning and initiation is so difficult, the only way to get things done is deadline driven.
Mm.
So that relies on anxiety and adrenaline and cortisol, and is very, very stressful for your body when you're forced to operate under those circumstances for a long time because the pressure is on and we need to hand it in tomorrow or meet the
Yeah.
deadline at work. So those experiences start to kind of tick, alarm bells, bit of stuff going on for a lot of our clients when it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I think that sounds like me. But,
I
yeah,
can also see, though, why there must be such difficulty with that diagnosis because COVID has thrown a huge spanner in the works because people are at home more. They're potentially just feeling less motivated because their whole timetable, their structure is disrupted. They're not able to see people that they normally would that would keep them sort of on track.
yes,
Yeah, and I would imagine though what differs between someone with a normal amount of anxiety or difficulty to carry out tasks or finding um, those strategies just aren't working for them is when it really starts to interfere with activities and their goals, would you say?
that's right. There are certain kind of tipping points in terms of life transitions, life stages, life stresses that can make what might have been a subclinical presentation that you were managing quite fine, tip over into one that's causing significant impact on your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I do think COVID did that for a lot of people who rely on external structures to organise a routine and organise
Yeah.
events and coordinate. So then when those are taken away, uh, then your time and concepts of time in ADHD can be very interesting and different for each person in terms of time blindness, or executive function in terms of how long things take to do, or what, tracking time, being aware of macro time or micro time. So you're right, without those external structures, there was a bit of a void
Yeah.
for a lot of people. And then throw in the kids are at home and we're supposed to be homeschooling them as well and
It's hard not to
multitasking
be
that.
distracted.
How are we not going to be distracted?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I think that is definitely added. And I think the other thing is added is just more people being prepared to sort of come out and talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, and understand that sometimes overfunction and hyperactivity and internalized restlessness can mean, certainly for a lot of women who are in the workforce and parenting and never ever have time to stop, get very overwhelmed with that. You kind of hit a certain point in your life. So when we talk about life stages, and when it can become difficult to manage, it could be the birth of your child, your first or your second or your third. Like, at what point does that tip over the balance of your executive function and what you need to hold or regulate for other people, let alone
Mm-hmm.
yourself? For some people, those life transitions, it's for women, it's large. It's often linked to hormonal changes. So with phases for young girls at around 12, 13, when things start to get a bit challenging, right,
Yeah.
when they need to go to high school. And it's like, oh, good, you do it yourself now. The impact of
I imagine having a child or reaching menopause as well.
absolutely all of those things. So yeah, post birth, and postnatally, really demanding perimenopause, menopause. So that's why that 30 to 40s and 50s, across that spectrum, um,
Mm.
a lot of women who were managing, and I say women, and I don't mean to be stereotyped, but that is the experience. Unfortunately, we're still working for a lot of families that are operating within traditional gendered roles and patriarchal expectations of what we must be able to manage.
Yeah.
And if you're not managing, you must be stressed and maybe a bit depressed. And here's an antidepressant. Is tends to be the way that is dealt with, and women are missed. Men are
Mm.
missed too, but to a much lesser extent, more likely to be caught earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What then would the differences be between the genders in terms of how it presents?
So one of the most significant differences, a lot of the time, is the difference between internalized internalized factors versus externalized factors. So again, if you think about the disruptive little boy in the classroom, everybody's noticing what's going on because they can't stop talking, they're bouncing around, they can't sit still. So it's externalized, it's impacting on other people. So they're going to do something about it. Traditionally, for younger girls and teens, it's internalized. So
Mm.
all of that pressure, all of that expectation, and often really high expectation, is internalized. So you're not making it a problem for other people. It's all inside you, and you're actually not talking about it.
Yeah.
So as you go along, if you're a hyperactive, impulsive person, that males may be more likely to get into trouble, drive
Mm.
cars, substance abuse problems, cause a bit of chaos. Whereas women, it tends to show up in relationships or
Mm.
missed career goals or mental health problems or the impact of not having a firm sense of self and being able to set healthy boundaries. And so they're ultimately the same, very similar things are going on in terms of our brain, but the way it comes out can look very different.
Yeah.
And the risks associated, are equally as valid, but sometimes not so obvious.
Hmm. Does there tend to be a better treatment outcome from one of the types of disorder to the next?
Mm, in terms of how your presentation, not so
Yeah.
much, not so much. And really, the treatments are the same, because no matter how it's presenting in you, in terms of the medical interventions or the medications that might be trialed, it's really, there are a few options available for adults, and it's often a little bit of a trial and error to see which one fits best for
Yeah.
you. But it doesn't tend to be prescribed based on presentation.
Hmm.
However, there are different comorbidities, or factors that are impacting you and your ADHD to a greater degree that might influence um, the treatment options.
Sure.
So, yes. So, if you get it right and you get the mix right and you understand the complexities of that the comorbidities are related, um, then the effectiveness should be the same. But I suppose for um, people who have had complexity in their lives and potentially have had, early life trauma and the impacts of CPTSD, and then an undiagnosed ADHD, and then have some, significant anxiety that might lead to, you know, OCD like tendencies. All of it, that we're looking at something, there's a lot more pieces to unravel to
Mm.
get the treatment right than if what we're looking at is a little more kind of straightforward presentation without a lot of leg
Sure.
practice, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'm just wondering, you'd be more acutely aware than others, possibly around the interaction of disability and ADHD then. A lot of people with a disability may develop ADHD as well, or, vice versa. I'm just wondering, in those cases, it must be that much harder to achieve that or to get to that diagnosis because so many other things are covered up.
Other factors, I think it's interesting in terms of the language,
Mm.
even that's used to describe differences in brain structure. So, disorder, disability, a lot of us reject even the term. I just say ADHD and never say the full term,
Mm.
because I don't feel like I'm living with a disorder. I feel
Yep.
like I'm living with a brain that operates a little differently. Do I
Hmm.
feel like I have a disability? No, I don't. Some people may view it that way. So, I guess to answer your question in terms of the complexities of unpacking what's going on, Jim, are you referring more to like younger people with with disability, or health conditions that sort of become chronic and result in disability?
More health conditions, and
Okay.
especially because if someone has had such a long period of time, let's say they've developed a mental health condition because of this series of misdiagnoses, or I'm thinking a lot of the people that I support have a brain injury, an acquired brain injury, and that affects their executive function. But is there something else that we're not picking up on and it just wasn't obvious before their injury?
Right.
So many things can confound, I can imagine, the treatment options for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding what was there first, what's the precipitating factor that other issues have developed from.
Mm.
An ABI is a good example. If you live with an undiagnosed ADHD and have, a tendency to be a tad impulsive or risk taking, then the likelihood that you're going to end up injuring yourself
Hmm.
is much higher. The likelihood that you're going to end up using alcohol or other drugs to self medicate is much higher. So
Yep.
then the risk exponentially uh, unfolds, um, and living with what can be quite a significant impairment at times in your life and not knowing what it is begets depression, anxiety, the amount of people who have felt that they are living with an anxiety disorder, that it actually turns out the anxiety is a result of untreated ADHD. And once we
Yeah.
treat the ADHD, the anxiety goes away, is fundamentally huge. You
Hmm.
know, it's a byproduct of feeling like you can't quite manage all the things, or you're going to miss the deadline, or you're going to, forget the appointment with the kid's teacher, or that, the constant vigilance. So when you
Yeah.
fix the original issue, then the secondary ones become less of an impact. So
Sure.
yeah, but you're right, in terms of unpacking comorbidities or autoimmune conditions is a really good example
Mm.
as well, because the impact of living a life of quite chronic internalized stress, and the interrelations with autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's or MS, endometriosis.
Hmm.
Like there are a lot of conditions that are, obviously it's not A plus B equals C, but they are correlated, in terms of the impact on your body. Stress
Interesting.
does big things.
Yeah. It's
Yes,
coming back to that
every time.
cortisol that you
That's
mentioned.
it. That's it. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm.
So you do a lot of assessments for people around ADHD. If
Mm.
someone does not fit the criteria, if you don't come up with a diagnosis for them, can they still access support from your service given that they present with issues that are similar? Or do you
That
need to refer them on?
that wouldn't be a problem for us. Ironically, it hasn't happened. I think
Mm,
because we're so niche, in terms of our focus, I've found, to date since launching the business, that by the time clients find us, they've been through a lot of other things that didn't work.
sure.
Um,
So it's easier for you to narrow it down.
it's easier, yeah. So we haven't had to reject, but if we did feel that there was a service that was a better fit, and I think that's the thing. So um, then we would have that conversation about, is this the right fit service
Yeah.
for you? Not going to exclude, if it
Yeah.
feels like it resonates. We're not your typical therapy kind of service. So I think there is definitely scope for, clients who kind of resonate with that sort of rebellious kind of side, um, to feel a synergy there as
Hmm.
well. Yeah.
And because you're not government funded
Mm.
necessarily, it means
Mm.
that you've got a bit more flexibility. They don't have to have a
No,
diagnosis.
that's right. That's right.
But I imagine you also do a lot of work with people who have received a diagnosis and are either wanting to access or already accessing the NDIS.
We have a small cohort of clients who are accessing the NDIS at the moment.
Okay.
Um, Often adult, at the moment, it's been adult women, who are both autistic and ADHDers.
Mm,
Accessing, you can't access, and ADHD alone does not tick the criteria.
right.
So to jump through the access, there needs to be multiple. So it may be chronic
Yeah.
fatigue, it may be a physical, condition, that's become chronic,
Mm,
plus autism, ADHD. So we do have, a cohort of clients, who are able to access, the NDIS, and then can come to us for their niche
yeah.
service. So that's great.
But
Our
then
findings.
people who can't get that access end up probably developing those conditions later on because of the lack of capacity for them to access the service. So I'm just thinking from a funding government perspective, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you could go on all day about this, but
Mm-hmm.
it just seems crazy. And, I struggle to understand why that's not enough when it's so debilitating.
Well, I guess it's about priority. It's about priority and funding mechanisms. I suppose a lot of the view is that, you know Medicare is and isn't there. It's not there
Mm,
for, coaching. ADHD coaching does not exist in Medicare. Focused psychological strategies does, And for us, with my mental health social worker who's on board, we can offer a Medicare service that is neurodivergent affirming
Yeah.
and is targeted to the mental health components of ADHD for some of our clients through that pathway.
Mm.
So the rest of our services at the moment are private. We're a private practice. Of course, I have lofty goals and ambitions for applying for grants and targeted funding to be able to subsidise service for clients more broadly in the medium term. Um, but we do have access issues all over the country at the moment because there's a severe shortage of psychiatrists who are trained in working with ADHD, who are willing to work with ADHD, who do not have their books closed, or really long waiting lists.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the reasons we've partnered. We're fortunate to partner with a telehealth psychiatrist who we can work, in collaboration with to try to fill some of those gaps. But there's a lot more that we need to do in terms of upskilling GPs and looking at other opportunities to open up access for adults. Yeah, if you look
Yeah.
at the stats, the costs far outweigh, the costs of untreated, long-term conditions in terms of, risk, substance abuse, divorce, family breakdown, the rest of it. There's lots of research studies being done on the long-term impacts of not treating ADHD. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, that's my social work hat, my advocacy hat,
Yeah.
for next stages of the business to really be able to see what's possible in terms of coming up with creative solutions to gain access for clients.
Yeah. So it's like there's a safety net there, but you have to fall a really, really long way in order to even get there.
Mm. Yeah.
Ah,
Yes.
shame. What support do you need as a person who's managing a million things at once, starting your own business? Do you have a mentor? Do you have other supports that you can access?
Yes. I made sure that when I started this business, I knew I needed to surround myself with support people for me.
Mm.
The number one thing I did was get a bookkeeper and accountant because I'm not doing that. That is not my skill set. I find it boring. I'm not good at it. I will make
Uh-huh.
mistakes. I'm like, well, if I'm going to run a business, I'm going to outsource that for somebody who's very expert in that.
Great.
So got that. Next thing I did was got someone to answer my phone and manage reception because I don't want to do
Mm.
that either. It's very difficult to do that while you're running a practice. So in terms of, I have a business mentor I work with, who provides that kind of bit of guidance. I got a financial coach who's my lovely, lovely man who I ring up and go, okay, so this is what I'm going to do now, and this is and how much can I earn, and so that's wonderful. Just being able to have those people who you can just be authentically going, I don't know everything. I know what
Mm.
I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at, and building a team of people around you who can support you in those areas that I need help. External peer supervision, internal peer supervision, an awesome team who are all we're there for each other as well. So I think it's building those resources so that you're not an island
Yeah.
when you're trying to navigate all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Mm.
And the people that you work with, your team, they're not all social workers, I gather. So
No.
how does that all work? How do you work together as different professions?
Yeah, we've got a bit of an eclectic bunch, because all of the therapists and coaches who work with me are all out neurodivergent
Mm-hmm.
professionals. So I guess firstly, that's a bit of a screener because you've got to be okay with that. Um, then so in terms of the team, I guess because my vision is a very holistic vision of support, we're not looking at just working with one piece of a person.
Yeah.
Being an ADHD affects all of you. It's how you see the world. It's how you operate in the world, who you're friends with. who you're in relationship with, you know, all our children are neurodivergent most of the time, highly hereditary, 75% heredity factor is the latest
Mm.
research. So
Wow.
we both find similarly wired people and create them and want to work with them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. So the team is kind of connected at various stages of their journey on that. Um, so always kind of states, neurodivergent led, and then kind of, there's a strong social work arm with my background, and then my mental health social worker, sort of taking that therapeutic kind of that can move into that psychology space. We don't have a psychologist on the team at the moment. Not that I'm opposed to having one, just haven't
Mm-hmm.
found one.
Yeah.
I've got a new dietitian
Mm.
who's just starting this week,
Amazing.
which is amazing. And I have the rest of my team have like got really really strong sort of different skills in counselling, uh, clinical supervision. I've got a university lecturer on the team who's a really experienced clinician, work with neurodivergent couples, can do
Mm-hmm.
family-based interventions, can do parenting support. She's amazing. And I've got a couple of team members who are really great at working with younger people. I've got a bloke on the team.
Yep.
We have a male therapist. He's really amazing with working with younger people who might have had trauma background, who are sort of coming to terms with their ADHD. We've got an amazing intersectional feminist who, again, is really really great at connecting with younger women and exploring the experience of being neurodivergent through a cultural lens, and the complexities of that. So we've people are coming with different perspectives, and I've
Mm-hmm.
also got a fabulous coach, like an executive coach. With a positive psychology background, who brings something different
Mm.
again, so can work in leadership areas, can work with corporate and executive, but also that kind of holistic life coaching, careers coaching guidance. So
Yep.
we've got a fair bit of breadth because one size doesn't fit all. And I really like that because not everyone's going to want to work with me. Some people are going to really want to work with me,
Mm.
but there's a choice and a different fit for really
Yeah.
feeling like you can be understood. So that's purposeful.
Yeah. Such a
Mm.
wonderful combination of skills and experience as well that you've developed there.
Yeah, yeah, it's going well. Great going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So any other mental health social workers who might be listening, who might think they are neurodivergent, or no, we're interested to hear from you because it's been a very liberating experience for some of the staff to actually go, what? That's actually an essential criteria to have a lived experience. A close family member. Like usually,
Yeah.
it would be a thing that you would hide in an interview or a workplace.
Mm.
So that's very different in terms of
Yeah.
sort of living and breathing who you are
It
and
sounds
as a
like
professional.
then there have been a lot of changes over time, some of which you've championed, but just in terms of trends in diagnosis, trends in awareness, talking
Mm,
about it more, as you mentioned, that
mm,
visibility and that reducing stigma.
yeah.
How do you see that playing out? Let's say, how has it changed over the last 5, 10 years, and where do you hope to see that continue in the future?
Oh, I would love to see, you know, all forms of difference. I think there was a big push, probably a decade ago, of sort of being a bit out with, people, celebrities and people coming out with their experience of mental health and starting to normalize that and
Yep.
talk about it. And a bit of that is happening with ADHD and with autistic entrepreneurs and people who
Mm.
are very proud of just being who they are and not ashamed. So the biggest thing in reducing stigma is letting go of that shame of being who you are. Like I'll do school pickup in my neurodivergent, t-shirt. Um, because if somebody asks, then you can talk about it. And when we
Mm,
start to talk about things, then we take away the association that there's something wrong, different, broken, deficient, um, and can start to dispel all of the myths too,
yeah.
and normalize. Our society is diverse. We know that.
Mm,
Some diversity is hidden. Some diversity is internalized, and the impact on individuals, or how we parent, or how our children see themselves, or how the school system is able to adapt and flex and be more creative and not feel like you have to fit a mold or you've failed, you know.
yeah.
So I think that's where I hope that this can go, by more people being that it becomes not even a question, that it wouldn't be something, that it would just be part of who you are, um, and that ultimately our education system is able to adapt and actually accommodate people's different learning styles,
Hmm.
in a very integrated way. So it doesn't mean that means you need learning support. It means you need to be moving while you're learning, or you need to do this practically because you learn through your body. Because if somebody talks at you, you're not going to be able to process that and just through auditory channels. You're visual. You need to see something. You need to do it. We all learn differently, and so how to curriculum within schools, in mainstream schools, just adapt to that. So
Yeah.
you don't have to have a label stuck on your forehead to be able to have an education that suits you.
Yeah, you don't get taken out of regular classes.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You
Because
know,
when you and I went to school, it
mm,
was very, you do maths, science, and English,
yeah,
and you might have an elective. Whereas now there are so many more things that have been built into the curriculum. Obviously, there are improvements that can be made, but
mm,
there's funding for school counsellors. Ideally, there would be more social workers in schools and
mm,
more counsellors in schools. But I think there is that additional catering for different learning types and different subjects that people can take on if they might have an interest that doesn't involve maths. So yeah, I think
absolutely.
that's great, but more can be done.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I
Mm,
think also to get to the point where there's not this kind of um, fear around diagnosis, particularly for parents with kids and
mm,
exploring it. I mean, the amount of parents who go through the process of, their kid's diagnosis, and by virtue of that go, oh, actually, that's me,
yeah, wow.
Um, it's huge, but the impact that that has on our kids to normalize difference is fundamental in terms of shaping the person they become,
Hmm.
you know, and definitely our personal experience of that in my own family, and my eldest is amazing. He had learning support. He started high school with learning support, and then he topped the year in science. And you're like, okay, so what's going on here exactly? Do
Uh-huh.
we just need targeted support in some areas, and enrichment and acceleration in others is usually how it rolls. For a lot of neurodivergent brains, there's a bit of a spiky profile. You're like really good at some stuff and not really good at some other stuff. And,
Yeah.
you know, trying to draw a mean across all of it is just meaningless. Just,
Hmm.
yeah. So I think taking away that fear factor and just normalizing difference and diversity is so powerful.
Mm.
Yeah.
And in amongst all the hundreds of things that you do on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah.
do you have the opportunity to work on any programs or projects? Is there anything exciting you're working on at the moment?
Programs or projects that I'm driving for the
Yeah.
business. I mean, I'm
Or
in.
even, like, are you part of any networks or focus groups or people that need to have this input from people who work in this space?
That is not something I've managed to facilitate after 8 months of the startup environment. It's definitely something I'm interested in being involved with. And that kind of consultation and speaking and connecting is, I had to realize and accept that I cannot do all of the things all at once.
Uh-huh.
And that is a personal challenge of mine, to try to set realistic expectations. Um, so some of that stuff is next step or opportunity based as well.
Sure.
But absolutely, that will be a yes. Ducks in, it's always working on getting your ducks in a row.
Yes, please.
Yes, but yes, please.
But
Yeah,
it also sounds as though in order to do that, you might need to bring more people on board, build the business
yeah.
so that you can take a bit more of a back step. But I also get the feeling you don't want to do that. You want to keep your feet on the ground at the same time and try to have that opportunity for therapeutic counseling in your day.
It's the balance of it. So I'm I'm drawn to the leadership and the business development at this part of my career, but I do think it's really important to remain connected to client experience. So it's
Hmm.
just about getting that client load just at the sweet spot where you're connected, but then you've got the opportunity and the time and the headspace to progress. Building an organization, you know it's building an organization and all of that and all of the things that takes.
Hmm.
um, and so I have a big framework in my head of where that's going. But you're right, it's one
Yeah.
step at a time, because you have to build the resources to be able to put a lot of that in place as you
Sure.
go as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm hearing that a lot of your work is informed by social work type perspectives, at least. You've mentioned
yeah,
trauma informed, and also I'm hearing like feminist and anti oppressive practices.
yeah.
How are there any resources, any other places where people could go to learn more about that, or any links that you could provide?
I think that's it's an interesting intersection at the moment, and one of the reasons I'm really passionate about bringing those social work perspectives into this area is that it's been largely devoid of that kind of advocacy, activism, intersectionality.
Mm,
It's largely existed within a medical model that is often a disempowering, expert, patient, disordered, deficit based language.
yeah,
Um, so I'm not comfortable in that space, and working in that. Although uh, we need to work in partnership to do that in a way that's empowering for our
sure.
clients. Um, I think really obviously we'll be developing all of that as we go, in blogs and resources. I think one of the best resources I've found, which is targeted at women, is called A Radical Guide for Women with ADHD.
Hmm.
It was written by Sari Solden and Michelle Frank, and I started reading that book and went, "Oh, did you get inside my head when I was developing this business?" Right? I'm like, "Oh, you." That's cool. That's cool, because they were at the forefront of kind of championing what ADHD looks like for women and the experience
Mm,
of ADHD for women, and that it is different, and it's valid, and that it's something to be spoken about and understood. So that guide is really powerful in terms of having a very strengths-based approach, and an empowering approach to understanding yourself and taking up space in the world. So I think
yeah,
I
great.
love that as a resource, and I wish I've had time to read all. I'm sure there are many more, and I'll spam you with additional links to be referenced, um, in the notes. But I think it's a growing area, um, of because there's intersections, between sexuality, sexual identity,
Mm,
disability, labels. What do you prefer to be called? How does that reflect your identity?
yeah,
Um, in terms of feminist perspectives, and why, one of the first blogs that I wrote was about why ADHD is a feminist issue, in that the women have been overlooked, for many, many years of even having a place or a voice in being acknowledged of the validity of experience. And that's, it's really important to unpack that and understand that there are so many implicit assumptions of what women can carry. And, it's like by default, stress is normalized and that divisions of labor are normalized. And, that's just going to be your life. So,
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to accept that. And we want to unpack it and understand, much more functional ways of being in the world and society. There's more equality there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can get
And
on a
it sounds like
soapbox about
it's,
that for a while.
yeah. It just sounds so important for people to be writing about this from their own experience and perspective, because
Mm.
otherwise you're getting people who are reading really dry textbooks
Oh
that
yeah.
are coming from that medical model that aren't really explaining the lived experience. So even things like books that have someone who is outward out in terms of their neurodivergence as
Mm.
even not even the main, not even the protagonist, it could be a supporting role, but
Mm.
whatever it is, just include it, start including it, have actors who are out talk about it and talk about the struggles of how it is to try to fit into that mold of, I'm on a film set and I have a deadline and I'm supposed to do this, and what do I do, what is that experience like?
Mm. Yeah.
Not just for people to get a sense of what it's like for them, but for also as models, for them to be models for other people, to say people with ADHD can do anything. It's
Mm.
just a matter of finding that right support and getting that awareness in the first place that that might be something that needs treatment in order to be your best self.
Mm. That's it. That's it.
Yeah,
Leverage the potential
for
of your
sure.
creative brain. Yes.
You've mentioned blog a couple of times, and I think, is there a podcast? Are there a couple of things you'd like to plug?
Well, thank you. Working on all of the things. So there is a YouTube channel that is growing. I think we've got 3 followers at the moment, so it'd be really great to have a few
Oh,
more.
oh,
Uh,
yes.
um,
Everyone like, subscribe,
yes, please like,
comment.
subscribe. This year, we've booked in regular times to film and record. Obviously, we're filming and recording to target people who need visuals to listen, or obviously you can also just have audio. But that's on the agenda for this year as a rollout of a number of topics that we feel are really sort of pivotal and relevant to the work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a list as long as my arm of the blogs that are going to be written. There's a couple that have been written and a couple under development. So those are on the website.
Yep.
So pretty much we're connecting to the website, Instagram page, Facebook page, and the vision is TikTok as well
Mm.
to catch the younger
The
audience.
youth.
The youth. I'm too old for Instagram and TikTok, so I've outsourced the Instagram,
I'm not
um,
brave enough for TikTok. I
and
just.
then the filming and the we've got to work through our own stuff as we go through this. But I think podcasting and interview and kind of getting more comfortable in that space when we're usually the people behind the scenes asking the questions and putting attention to support our clients can be a
Yeah.
little bit confronting to kind of turn that around, and get your voice out there and
Mm-hmm.
have your face out there.
And encourage others to do the same.
That's it. That's it. So there's a bit of rock star Brene Brown, rock star social worker as I call her.
Yep.
You know, moving through your vulnerability. Courage takes vulnerability. So I think that's a big part of the journey as
Mm-hmm.
well. So hopefully in 6 months' time there'll be like a series of podcasts because my 6-year-old is a bit like, well, where's the podcast? Where's the podcast, Mum? Like I'm going to follow it, but that one's a bit long and too much talking. So, you know, moving into that space and getting comfortable with being creative, I think,
Yeah.
is part of it as well. So
Amazing. Making things accessible. So
that's it.
important.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about the work that you do or about the business that you want to tell people about?
I think I think probably the last thing that's really important to me is, as kind of when I was developing this business idea, that, you know, the Divergent Edge kind of sounds like a band name. I mean, for me as a
And the
frustrated,
logo
yeah,
looks
yeah,
like
yeah,
Pink Floyd.
that's right. Okay, so it's edgy on purpose. You know, I always wish that I was lead singer in a band, but lack the talent. Um, so
You could
it's,
be in Roxette, I reckon.
oh, okay, okay, will you? Thanks,
It
thank
fits.
you. I think
Which
that,
makes sense to no one unless they're looking at the YouTube video right now.
well, there you go. You'll be able to see it, this sort of there in the background. Um, there is a brand that's, it's different on purpose to catch clients who maybe feel like they haven't found their, you know, their place or their support person or their therapist that gets it,
Mm,
who's comfortable with being a bit out there. You know, you're either going to love us or not, and I'm okay with that.
yeah.
Not trying to meet everybody's needs, but I think the feedback that we've had so far is that the branding with that rebellious kind of outspoken edge, and that integrated strengths approach, particularly in this sector, is a point of difference. Um, and so that's really, really important
Mm-hmm.
to me as I guess a feature of not only myself feeling comfortable within the brand, but brand alignment for staff and the vision of, you know, being a bit of an agitator or a social agitator over time to get conversations started. So, you know, there's that empowered, you know, when we get the merch line set up, on the website, also under development, when we've got t-shirts and, you know, stickers and hats and fidget things and logos. So I've, you know, got lots of ideas for all of that,
Yeah.
you know, to be able to, you know, what a goal to have clients, you know, if somebody was brave enough to walk around wearing a Divergent Edge t-shirt, that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that they felt proud that they were connected with. So I think there's that positivity, but, you know, it's it's not your traditional therapeutic practice, I suppose.
And it's
And
important that it's not.
yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so for our fit, and for our, if it resonates, with clients who are looking for support, if there's something, that speaks to you that's appealing. Not everyone needs to have obviously wanted to be the lead singer in a rock band. That's not what it's about. But it was that kind of, strength. You know, the triangle is, you know, it's strongest shape. So
Mm.
it's a bit in your face, um, on purpose, in a really nice, supportive way, because obviously we're therapists and we're here to help. So,
Yeah,
you
great.
know, there's that dichotomy there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
I think it's just been so helpful that you've broken down ADHD features for me and trends and treatment, and that you've been so active in leading change in the sector. I think it's so important. And often, as social workers, we can be striving for something, but it might not be the right fit for us. And so it's just not going to work. And we're going to lose sight of why we started in the first place. But you've been able to create more effective services, which is really wonderful. And you've chosen to see each interaction as an opportunity for normalizing that diversity, which is incredible. And I loved what you were saying about social agitation. There's such a passion in that. And in order to have that, you need to know so much about the sector. You know, you need to know
Mm,
what you're working with, your cohort, but also what supports are out there and what the legislation and the guidelines are looking like in order to mix things up a bit. So
yeah.
that's really cool.
Mm,
I look forward to the opportunity to share these ideas with my listeners, and maybe they can then take things back to their families or their networks, spread the word, and just get other people interested in, firstly, knowing more about the work that you do, but secondly, being open to that vulnerability and reaching out there and creating something for themselves that might not have been on their radar before, or they might have just thought, there's no one out there that feels this way, and maybe people can be reaching out and seeing you as a mentor as well, and hopefully you'd be open to asking any questions if anyone else wants to interact.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that that's really important. And I welcome, collaboration and partnership and networking. I think, being a telehealth service as well is even more important. We do
Mm,
our connections virtually, but that becomes really powerful as a way of connecting um, and building a movement. If we don't want to get too grand about it, um, you know, 8 months into the startup, but I had a really great conversation really early on with a very wise mentor who said to me, Dani, don't limit yourself, don't limit the vision,
mm,
because if you wherever you draw the line, human nature, you'll not quite get like you probably not quite get there,
sure.
so don't limit the vision for what's possible. So at the moment I don't know what the end, what done looks like.
Which is terrifying.
Well, yeah, I'm like, okay, we'll just keep moving and see where it evolves.
Hmm.
And I think balancing that with you know self care and looking after yourself, and how do we manage all of these things and be measured about what's possible in timeframes. But I think building collaboration and like-minded um, people who can resource each other along the way is really, really important.
Hmm.
So bring it
Find
on.
your tribe.
That's it. Find your tribe. If you haven't found it, you've got to connect and build it, I
Hmm.
think, and that can be very, very powerful, um, particularly if you've lived a life of feeling like you didn't quite fit in.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
Well, that's a great thing to leave us on. Thank you again
Thank
so much
you.
for this opportunity. I've loved meeting with
Pleasure.
you, and I can't wait to share this with my listeners.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure. See you.
Bye.